Welcome to the Yellow Submarine. We'll be going into full details on the importance of 1960 in the Beatles' career. 1960 is a year that holds great significance for the band that changed the face of rock music forever. When the year began, they were a developing band, known only as the Quarrymen, with local popularity. When the year ended, they were a fully-fledged band with international recognition and finally deserving the name Beatles. The first iconic moment for the band in 1960 was a rebranding on the 5th of May, 1960, when they changed their name from the Quarrymen to the Silver Beatles. The idea of the name came when Stu Sutcliffe, John Lennon's best friend from high school, had joined the band and suggested the insect name as a form of emulation of their role models Buddy Holly and the Crickets. On the 10th of May, the Liverpool Golden Boy, Billy Fury, was going on his tour titled Idols on Parade, and Larry Parnes, his music promoter, had traveled there to choose a band to accompany Fury on his journey. Among the bands that showed up for the audition are Cass and the Casanovas, Derry and the Seniors, Cliff Roberts and the Rockers, and of course, the Silver Beatles. The band was surprisingly hopeful even though they had two significant problems. Their drummer, Tommy Moore, was nowhere to be found, and Stuart Sutcliffe was still learning to play the bass guitar. But they gave a splendid performance, but unfortunately, they were not chosen. Even though it was a defeat, the Beatles did not take it to heart, as just 2 days after, they performed at the Lanthorn Hall in Liverpool. However, on the 18th of May, the band received a call from Larry Parnes, offering them the chance to support Johnny Gentle on his tour of Scotland. For this trip, the Silver Beatles decided to adopt aliases. John Lennon became Long John, Paul McCartney became Paul Raymond, Stuart Sutcliffe became Stuart DeStale, and George Harrison became Carl Harrison. On the 20th of May, 1960, Johnny Gentle's tour of Scotland titled The Beat Ballad Show officially started, and the Silver Beatles were pleased to be the backup band. They began the tour at the Town Hall in Alloa, Scotland. The band was under a lot of pressure because they were under-rehearsed and they knew little about the songs they had to perform. But it was on this trip that they formed a friendship with Gentle, and John Lennon even input in a song Gentle was writing, "I've Just Fallen for Someone." In the duration of 7 days, the band traveled to 7 cities and performed live on stage. On the first day, they visited Alloa. On the second day, they continued at the Rescued Hall in Aberdeen and the Northern Meeting Ballroom in Inverness. The band also played at the Dalrymple Hall in Fraserburgh and continued to Banffshire, where they played in St. Thomas Hall the next day. After that, they went to the Town Hall in Forres on the 5th day and performed at the Regal Ballroom in Nairn. The tour ended on the 28th of May, 1960, with a performance at the Rescue Hall in Peterhead. The exact songs played by Johnny Gentle and the band is unknown, but Harrison remembered that they played Teddy Bear and Wear My Ring Around Your Neck by Elvis Presley. Other sources have confirmed that in addition to this, the band played It Doesn't Matter Anymore and Raining in My Heart by Buddy Holly, I Need Your Love Tonight by Elvis Presley, Poor Little Fool by Ricky Nelson, He'll Have to Go by Jim Reeves, and others. When the Silver Beatles returned home on the 30th of May, 1960, they had an opening at the Jacaranda Coffee Bin, popularly known as the Jacks. The regular house band, the Royal Caribbean Steel, had taken a night off, and their manager, Alan Williams, had asked them to perform at the bar since he couldn't secure an opening for them elsewhere. After this, they also made their debut at the Nelson Institute at Wirral on the 2nd of June, 1960, after which they played for 6 consecutive nights. This is the first performance that the Silver Beatles will be known for after they changed their name, and this is why it is an iconic event. Because of their incredible performance, the promoter at Jack's secured them another gig in a venue known as the Grosvenor Ballroom, Liskeard Wirral, on the 11th of July, 1960, just 2 days after they left the Jacks. The place was surprisingly rough, and the band did their best to satisfy the audience. They performed on 14 different occasions before the building was closed on the 30th of July, 1960, because the locals complained of noise pollution. Despite the ruggedness of the venue, the band pulled on regardless. They also played with another popular band at the time known as Jerry and the Peacemakers. However, on the 13th of June, Tommy Moore suddenly disappeared from the team. When they scrambled around the city and eventually found him, He told him that he was quitting and that he couldn't forfeit his day job working a shift at the Garston Bottle Works for the cheap life of playing the drums. It was a very bad night for the Beatles, as they had to go on stage without a drummer and were even asking the audience if anyone knew how to drum. But they survived and persevered still. On the 18th of June, Paul McCartney celebrated his 18th birthday, and the whole band rejoiced with him. As their popularity grew, their friend, Johnny Gentle, joined them for a surprise performance of their Scottish tour repertoire at the Grosvenor Ballroom on the 2nd of July, 1960. After the long search for a drummer, the band eventually hired Randolph Pete Best. The man was known almost to reach the proverbial top of the rock and roll world. But today is not about the history of Pete Best. With the addition of Pete Best to the band, they finally changed their name to that nomenclature that the world is familiar with today, the Beatles. Before the official announcement, the Beatles signed a contract with Broom and Koschmider, the owner of the Indra Club in Germany. The deal was to play at the club for 2 months between the 17th of August and 16th of October. But due to the complaint made by locals about the noise pollution, they could only play for 48 days. During the weekdays, they played for 4.5 hours, while they played for 6 hours on Saturdays. The first day was particularly stressful, as they had to huddle together on stage and lower their bass to suit one of the customers. There was also a meager turnout at the venue, as only their employers and a few prostitutes witnessed the band. They were very frustrated after this performance, but over time, the attendance increased and they adapted to the stage. After the complaint by the locals, they moved to Kaiser Keller, another one of Bruno Koschmider's clubs, on the 4th of October, 1960, and they played there alongside Rory Storm and the Hurricanes for the next 58 days, which ended on the 30th of November, 1960. But while in Germany, the Beatles made yet another iconic moment when they first went to the Acoustic Studios in Germany on the 15th of October, 1960, to perform a demonstration tape for Lou Walters of Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. The two bands were rivals, but were managed by one person, Alan Williams. The Hurricanes had a residency in Germany at the time, as they were finalizing Summertime. Alan knew immediately that the right persons for the job were the Beatles, so he called for them, but the Beatles drummer, Pete Best, was on an errand out of town, and they needed someone to play the drums. Enter Ringo Starr, a drummer of the Hurricanes at the time. And since they were one of the most popular bands in Liverpool, he was pretty famous among his peers. Ringo agreed to drum for them, and together they taped Summertime and proceeded to tape Fever and even September Song. At that moment, without even knowing it, the final lineup of the Beatles' first song together, although in different bands. In November, the Beatles were poached by another club called the Top 10 in Germany. It was a much nicer club, and it had a better atmosphere. Harrison and friends would go there in their free time and enjoy the Sheridan or whoever is playing. There was a time they acknowledged their presence and even allowed them to perform. After that, the manager realized it would be a mistake to let the band go. While preparing for their move to the Top 10, however, something tragic happened. The authorities got an anonymous tip that one of the Beatles, George Harrison, was below 18 and he didn't have a work permit. So they came for him and ordered his deportation back to the United Kingdom. Harrison spent his last night in their apartment teaching John Lennon his guitar parts so the band could continue without him. It was a very emotional time in the band when he finally left Germany on the 21st of November, 1960. And sadly, he wasn't the only one who got deported. After some days, Paul McCartney and Pete Best were returning to their apartment at night and were suddenly apprehended by the local authorities and charged with arson. They were, however, released the next day, but before the day ended, they heard a loud bang on the door again. The police barged in and took them to the police headquarters. Every attempt to persuade the authorities fell on deaf ears, as they insisted that the Beatles be deported with immediate effect. They were taken back to their apartment, where they only had 5 minutes to pack their luggage and leave. By the second day of December 1960, the band's only member in Germany was John Lennon, because even Stuart Sutcliffe was in temporary hiding with Astrid Kircher in Hamburg. He had to work his way through manual labor to afford his flight back home. And 10 days after his friends left, he also managed to travel home to Liverpool. After these unfortunate incidents, the band was devastated and didn't contact each other for 5 days. George Harrison had already gotten a job that paid him what he considered to be enough when John Lennon and Paul McCartney came to him that they got a gig. He was pretty adamant at first, but he later joined them. However, they had a problem. Stuart Sutcliffe was still stuck in Hamburg, and they needed a replacement for the meantime. And that was when they hired Charles Newby, formerly a rhythm guitarist for the Blackjacks, to play the bass for them at the Casbah Coffee Club, where their gig was. Now, the club was a place where the band frequently played when they were still known as the Quarrymen. But because the posters read, "The Beatles, direct from Hamburg, Germany," no one bothered to research the identity of the Beatles, and they all came in multitude. When the band went on stage, the audience was disappointed, but when they started playing, everyone was mesmerized. And it was then that the Beatles knew that something had changed since their travel to Germany, and they weren't the old band they used to be. After this, the Beatles were blessed with a homecoming performance at the Litherland Town Hall, and they attracted a lot of attention, including Johnny Guitar and, of course, Ringo Starr. The Beatles ended the year with a New Year's Eve performance at the Casbah Club in Germany on the 31st of December, 1960, hoping that the years to come would be much better than the years behind.